Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Calley, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan, reporting to you from my basement headquarters, and that's because it is Juneteenth. The SBAM office is closed today, but we're still coming to you live for our Small Business Briefing. Happy Juneteenth, everybody.
Yes, happy Juneteenth. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications. We appreciate you tuning in today. We do want to say hello and welcome to one of our newest members, Grit, located in Birmingham. So welcome to David Hamilton, the owner, and the entire Grit team. And we are welcoming them on behalf of our sponsor, Consumers Credit Union. You can learn more about them at consumerscu.org. So Brian, you kind of teased out last week that we'd be looking at quite a few numbers and economic indicators on today's show. So let's start with Michigan's economic performance and workplace numbers that were issued late last week. How do they look?
Yeah, actually very strong still, and that wasn't a surprise. It was expected to come in pretty strong. So the unemployment rate, which we always kind of look, you don't necessarily consider that to be the main thing we look at anymore because Michigan is shrinking, and so the unemployment rate doesn't mean what it used to, but 3.7%. It's actually quite low, higher than the national unemployment rate, but at a pretty historically low rate. You might recall that it got really, really high in 2009, 10, into 2011. It started to really come down during the end of 10 and 11, and then was kind of on a good trend. It got about as low as it is right now through 2019, and then of course the pandemic in 20 just kind of reset everything. It got quite high, and now it's really back to where it was before in that trend line. And so really, really good news there. There's really only been a handful of times in the last 40 years when it's been sub 4%. So it's an important marker. Overall, the state recorded 4,440,000 payroll jobs, and that marked an increase month over month of about 15,000. So really solid performance, and that's just that 1 month, but really this year has had each month come in a little stronger, and that's drawing more people into the workforce. So you've heard us really kind of fret about labor force participation rate. So the pie has been shrinking in terms of our population, but the proportion of the pie working has also been behind, but that's been inching up. It was stuck just below 60%, and then it kind of stalled out at 60%. But the last couple of months, we've seen that inching up too. So 60.5%. Again, nothing to brag about for the rest of the nation, because we're still quite a bit behind, but now this marks what started to look like a trend of labor force participation rate inching up. So not particularly surprising when there's this much demand for people, and it's enticing more folks to come back into the workforce, and employers are doing really as much as they've ever done to try to attract people, everything from flexibility to pay and fringe benefits, remote work, and so forth, whatever applies, whatever to get people. But it is starting to make a difference, this demand for people and all of the things that go along with that. Well, we're going to talk a little while here about inflation and why this is the same thing as kind of keeping inflation, especially in the service sector, a bit high. But this economic performance so far this year, really this whole year, has been pretty impressive.
Well, that is definitely good news. Let's talk now about the Federal Reserve meeting last week. What was the outcome?
Yeah, and I know it seems like we're always talking about the Federal Reserve, but they raised interest rates 10 meetings in a row, and but they didn't in this last meeting. And you might recall, we were doing a little bit of forecasting a couple of weeks ago that the expectation was that they would pause on increasing interest rates and let things settle a little bit. And there was the jobs numbers around the country still looked pretty hot, to the point where they might, maybe would throw that into question. But I think that those expectations were tempered pretty quickly. And the Federal Reserve seemed very unified in holding interest rates where they're at for now. But I also I read from the both from the publication and from the press conference that Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, did on the heels of the directors meeting. I felt like he was setting the stage that probably later on this year there could be one or two more interest rate increases, and that you never know what the real agenda behind setting those expectations is. You know, they're looking to and part of it I know is that like analysts were projecting in the future and the market's projecting in the future that rates were now going, they hit the peak and they're going to start going down. It might be that they're not really expecting to raise them later on, but they don't necessarily want the market to expect them to decrease either. So I felt like they did kind of go out of their way to establish an expectation that they are not done yet, even though as we look, when we get to Data Monday today, you're going to see that that there's undeniably progress being made in all the different aspects of inflation, even if it has been painfully slow progress.
Okay. Another story we've covered quite a bit on the show is this Goshen battery plant, and there's been some new movement there. Tell us more.
Yeah, there's a federal agency that looks at deals that might cause some sort of national security issue or question. And so there was a request into this federal department to review the Goshen battery plant. Now, this would be in the Big Rapids area, a factory that would make batteries for vehicles, so electric vehicles, batteries for electric vehicles. And the company is owned by a Chinese company, and of course, in China, the industry is nationalized. So the government essentially owns the businesses and the domestic businesses. So in this case, the question was, does this pose a national security risk for the United States? And so the review from the agency, it's called a federal security review. They actually declined to do an in-depth review, saying that there wasn't a need for that, that the nature of this particular investment wasn't such that it was going to cause any sort of national security problem. So that actually removes one potential obstacle to this project moving forward, although there are still local approvals that are required in order for it to move forward. So the state has put in a pretty substantial incentive package to draw this plant in the first place, kind of a big celebration around that announcement earlier, but pretty controversial at the local level, and will require additional local action to move forward. But in terms of the federal government, I wouldn't expect any kind of formal issues moving forward at that level of government.
Okay, let's go to the state legislature where the House of Representatives has proposed a new energy plan. Can you tell us what's in this plan?
Yeah, this is so there's an energy plan that is sponsored by representatives in the Democratic caucus of the House of Representatives, and that's the majority caucus. So this, whenever something is proposed from them, we have to take it seriously. And so this energy plan that was introduced, it essentially would eliminate any fossil fuels from the Michigan electric energy portfolio by 2035. Now this, and we've all been kind of trained to think or to hear when somebody says fossil fuels, it means elimination of coal. There's a lot of reasons why coal is being eliminated. They're already phasing out of coal. What makes this plan a little more expensive, and not a little more, potentially a lot more expensive, and potentially cause reliability issues, is that fossil fuel also includes natural gas. And in the past, natural gas has not been viewed because it has such low emissions that are created when it is converted to electricity. It's not been considered in the same league, like, hey, eliminated all fossil fuels, including natural gas. So There has been, of course, big changes in our energy portfolio over the last 15 years or so in Michigan, where renewable energy has become a bigger part of it. That trend will definitely continue, but there's something called base load. So you have to have a certain, whether the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, a certain amount of energy that you have to be prepared to generate even without those renewable sources. And this what they call clean energy, this clean energy plan, it does go far enough to where it could potentially cause both cost and reliability issues. They have a pretty aggressive time frame on it, looking for Michigan to hit 60% elimination of non-renewable sources by 2030, and then 100% what they call carbon-free, 100% carbon-free by 2035. Now that carbon-free is a term of art, because carbon is, there's a lot of carbon emissions that happen when batteries are created, for example. So even though the battery itself doesn't create carbon emissions, the creation of the battery does. It's the same type of thing here. So they're just talking about the inputs into generation of electricity. So that's been introduced. I do not expect any action to be taken on that straight away, but next fall, this is something that both on the House and the Senate side, things that would potentially cause reliability and cost concerns on the part of small businesses are more likely to be considered. So we'll keep both a close eye on that, but also be speaking into the system that, you know, everybody knows that the whole industry, without any kind of regulations or moves, is moving away from coal. That's already, at least here in Michigan, already slated to happen, already going to happen. It's the real question here is whether or not you eliminate all reliable baseload options, which I expect the sponsors of this package are really going to have to explain how that's possible to do. Actually, Sarah, let me cover one more state policy issue that I just recalled from last week. So there was a House Labor Committee met and took testimony, or I'm sorry, House Labor Committee announced that this week that they're taking testimony on a bill that would repeal a law that prevents every local jurisdiction from creating their own labor laws. So things like minimum wage. So this township, this city, this county, this village could have a different minimum wage to the next one, to the business next to it. The reason that this is so problematic is because people don't necessarily work all in the same place. For example, you know, today I'm working in Ionia County in Danby Township. Tomorrow I will be working in the city of Lansing in Ingham County. You know, the idea whether these types of things, scenarios where people work in different areas, might be in the construction industry, might be in landscaping, could be in delivery of food, where you're crossing over different jurisdictions, and a lot of different types of businesses do that. And so this idea of having different wage fringe benefit and labor law requirements from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, you can see really quickly why that it's not really feasible to accomplish. And I know what the answer, of course, to the proponents would be, well, just if everybody would just pay way above whatever the minimum requirements are on the highest one around, then it's easy, you know, like that type of an approach. But there's that piecemeal approach is problematic for operating. So if the state wants to consider a higher minimum wage, then the state should consider a higher minimum wage, as opposed to saying that out of the thousands of local jurisdictions and between all the different townships, cities, villages, counties, you know, you got school districts, DDAs, you got all these different, you know, Michigan has a lot of local governments, literally thousands of them. And having a patchwork of different labor laws in each one would prove very, very challenging for businesses that don't operate with a compliance staff and a team of lawyers at their disposal.
No, that's it's certainly a compliance nightmare. So thank you for bringing that up today, and we'll definitely keep people posted. Let's move on to line 5, where there's some news related to some tribe land in Wisconsin.
Yeah, the Bad River Reservation is located in northern Wisconsin, and we've been talking a lot about Line 5 that carries Canadian oil to refineries that serve the Midwest, including Michigan. The part that usually hits the news is the part that goes along the bottomlands of the Mackinac Straits, and the plan to put that into a tunnel about 100 feet below the Straits of Mackinac. So in other words, out of the water in a dry tunnel. But what this issue is a 12-mile stretch that goes across the Bad River Reservation. And we talked about this before because there was a lawsuit in federal court, and our Attorney General, Dana Nessel, had submitted an amicus brief to support the reservation, the tribal council decision or request, demand to immediately close down the pipeline. So it went to court to do that. They had given Enbridge, the owner of the pipeline, a lease through 2043. But what they were saying is they want to just cancel it. And so they're in court. Now, there's already a plan at Enbridge eventually, they know by 2043 anyway, that they're not going to be able to have the pipeline where it is. That lease will expire and they'll have to move. They have a plan to take it around the reservation, and but of course closing it down immediately would be problematic for access to, getting the oil to take like 1,000 trucks, literally 1,000 trucks a day, every day, to do what the pipeline does. And propane in the UP, by the way, is served by this pipeline as well. It's how oil stays separate, so they can move propane and light crude at the same time through the same pipeline. So propane is really important for the UP. So the federal judge decided late Friday night that the tribe could not demand that it be closed down immediately, and gave 3 years instead. So nothing will happen immediately. However, 3 years is different than the lease being honored through 2043. And so I expect that this case will continue to move through the court system. There's also been some additional noise at the federal level. There's not really a lot that the federal government would do to weigh in on the pipeline, but there are some things that the White House could do, either to clear the way or to get in the way of the Line 5 project and running it through a tunnel instead of on the bottomlands of the Straits. I'm noticing mounting pressure on the White House because the regular agencies, they don't like it's political pressure is the thing, or kind of slowing things down through political pressure is really the thing I think to watch here. The court part is going to play its way through. That opponents will not stop until every legal option is exhausted, and of course the company and proponents of availability of reliable energy will keep on defending it. So that's going to play its way out. I think it is. There's increasingly pressure being put on the White House to like do something, and so we'll see. But for now, this decision means that no immediate change in the status quo, but the fact that this judge, it's interesting how nobody wants to really own a final decision. So the judge said, well, the lease doesn't have to be honored, but you can't close it down right away. It's a surprising and kind of strange decision to kind of like, it's, I guess, looked at as it sounds more like a political compromise that if it's if the lease is cancelable, then it's cancelable. And there's no provision in the lease that says it's cancelable with 3 years notice, but that's the judge just decided to give 3 years. And the way I take that is just kind of like, it's a hot potato. I'm gonna make sure that I don't get blamed for spiking energy prices in the short term, and then I'm gonna toss this up to the Court of Appeals. So I wouldn't be surprised if this one makes its way, especially since there are treaties involved, both treaties with a tribal nation and also with another nation, Canada. That this could be the sort of thing that ends up getting sorted out in the U.S. Supreme Court.
Okay, earlier you did reference inflation, that maybe we have some promising news there. Are you going to cover that in this week's Data Monday report?
Yeah, I will. I want to cover a couple of things here in our Data Monday report, and that would include the inflation numbers, of course, but also some wage growth numbers came out, and this is, of course, highly connected to our the inflation numbers, and so it makes sense to kind of look at these things in context. So the first slide here is just the lowest earning quartile of the population and the highest earning quartile. So the 25 and the 25% at the bottom and the 25% at the top. Now, lower wage earnings have been going up faster than high wage earnings, but a few months ago that started to turn over. So while it is still going up faster, you can see from this chart in blue that it is starting to turn over. It's that these things, the higher quartile is catching up to the lower quartile. So, and again, I want to point out that this decrease here does not mean that the wages are going down. It means that they're going up by 6.8% instead of 7.5%. Okay, so it's so as you look at these numbers, you can see why inflation is going down very slowly. It's because there's different things happening. Goods and commodities are coming down. Services are staying a little higher. Now, looking at the median wage growth, as you might imagine, the previous chart showed the upper and the lower quartile, and the above and below the 6%. The average is still 6%, so still pretty high. The in terms of historicals, if you look back, it was kind of steadily growing from 2010 all the way through to 2020, kind of nice positive incline. Then it jumped up and it stayed higher. And again, even though it shows that it's moderating out a little bit, so that's what we see happening in inflation, is moderating out a little bit. But this does not mean that wages are coming down. It means they're going up slower than before. The University of Michigan also put out their Consumer Sentiment Index, and this is definitely down in the territory where we've experienced recessions before. So this is the one piece that, the overall consumer sentiment is relatively low right now, but both the sentiment and the expectations, but a little bit of positive news even in this chart, which is that both were up slightly from the previous numbers last month. So consumer sentiment and consumer expectations are actually a pretty good predictive measure. So this would suggest that we have recessionary risks in front of us. People start feeling that recession in different ways and behaving such when they see in terms of their overall sentiment, they start behaving that way sometimes before you see it show up in the economic data. So let's get to inflation. Looking at the CPI, that's what you see here in blue. The blue is the overall CPI, down to 4%. It hasn't been 4% in a while. It's we've been riding higher inflation that got up a little over 9% one month. But if you look at the core CPI, so this would be CPI less food and energy, which are those fast moving, more commodity based prices, you see that core 5.3%. But I would point out that that's coming down too. The core starting to come down a bit, which is good news, but overall is a bit lower than the previous month. If you look at the month-over-month numbers here, you'll see that overall CPI was up 0.1% from last month. That's lower than April. So May was a little better than April, but if you look at the core, again, a little bit, May was a little bit lower than April, but it is kind of stuck at that 0.4% month over month. So not any worse, but not a lot better either. But here's really, I think, a very telling chart. And this is the year over year experience in inflation, overall inflation for the United States economy. And it was as high as 9.1. And here we go, 9.1 to 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That marks 11 months in a row where the overall inflation has come down. And it's a pretty gradual step down, as you can see there. It's been, with as much as the Fed has increased interest rates, I think some expected it would come down faster than this. But again, there's a shortage of people, shortage in housing, and so it's not like we have all these excesses where the bottom can fall out. The shortages, ironically, when it comes to the economic performance, are working in the favor of the stats. Looking at a few items on their own, separated out, you'll see that vehicle repair, motor vehicle repair, so car and truck repair, is one of the higher inflationary items. But look at the ones that are in deflationary mode, or the prices actually literally come down. Fuel, oil, gasoline, airfare. I don't know, I kind of hard time believing that one, because I just was looking at airfares for a summer vacation. It seemed still pretty high to me. But then natural gas, used cars and trucks. I mean, these things really have come down. Meats, poultry, fish, and eggs. Now, remember how bad that got, but those were pretty much even. So these are, looking at these different categories, you see that a lot of the things that were pretty high before have started to come down. And these are the things that are dragging down the overall CPI. A couple ways, other ways you can look at it. So in this cases, we're talking this in blue, you see commodities. So think like goods or consumers, commodities, except for food and energy. And so you'll see in blue that actually has settled down into the rate that the target rate, around 2%. It's the services that are still higher. So services except for energy services, and you'll see that that's started to come down just a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. So good news there. And then just one more way of looking at services is you take a look at services except for housing. And so this one, you really see that starting to come down. So the reason that this is important is because with housing, there's a tremendous shortage of housing units. And so that keeps that price higher. Take that out and look at things where there's not like shortages keeping prices higher, and just look at what regular supply and demand, absent severe shortages, and you'll see that the services are coming down too. So all in all, I would think that the Federal Reserve policymakers would be more confident now that things are heading in the right direction on inflation. And then looking at NFIB, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, they do a monthly survey. One of the things they asked, what's the single most important problem that small businesses face? Inflation's still number one, but just barely. Quality of labor is pretty much tied with it. And then the final slide here, Sarah, is looking at what expected inflation is. So just looking at what the surveys say people are expecting in terms of future inflation, and 3.5% moving forward, which is a pretty good, actually a pretty good estimate of what it probably will be over the next year. So most economists are skeptical that overall inflation will get down to the target 2% in the next year, but the idea that it gets below 4, stays below 4, and trends down more toward 3 is something that's really pretty realistic. So overall, inflation heading in the right direction, especially look at it different ways. You can see that even in the services category that's held it up higher, it's looking pretty good. And wages are, cooling off a little bit, but still trending higher, which is again working in the opposite direction of those inflation concerns. So a lot to keep on watching, but from Michigan to the national economy, generally last week overall was good news.
All right, we like good news. So that's all we have for you today. I want to invite you to join us Thursday morning for a webinar with the American Arbitration Association. They'll be talking about alternative dispute resolution. It'll be led by former Chief Justice Bridget McCormick and her colleague Svetlana Gitman. So please join us. You can register at sbam.org/events. And of course, we'll see you back here Thursday at 3 p.m. Have a great week.
Thanks, everybody. See you on Thursday.